Hey, everyone. Welcome. This is going to be another common question video as it applies to gesture drawing, difficulties that everybody has with it, common questions I get. Um, just as a reminder, another Brainstorm Flash course is coming up. You can check it out at the address in the top left, brainstormschool.com, and the Flash course is starting pretty soon here. The Flash courses are 5 weeks, 2 hours a week, and cover everything to do with gesture. So if you're confused with gesture, if you never understood how it leads or builds into your process, how it starts a drawing, how to develop and make it specific to you and what you want to accomplish, it's just devoted to that. So I take a lot of student question, we try to personalize it so everybody can get their kind of specific needs met as far as what this is to their practice. And so there's information if you want to sign up in the description below. But otherwise, what I'm here to kind of give some feedback on today is foreshortening. So that's probably the most common question I get in gestures. Actually, two that are really common. First is, well, how do you do the front view without any side to side? Well, I made a video for that, and you could check that out if you've ever had that problem or issue in your drawing. That's just called Common Questions Gesture 1. And this will be on the second most, which is, like I said, foreshortening. So the weird part of the answer to that question is, how do you foreshorten a gesture? And the answer is you really don't, right? Because foreshortening requires things in a gesture that we don't usually use. So those would be shapes, right? Because in order to make something feel like it's getting closer or further, I might want to foreshorten that shape using perspective. So we could even add that to the list. We don't have these things with gesture. Or we could even say something simple like, with a shape, what you would need for a gesture would be to show overlaps. That's foreshortening. Something that's clearly behind something else in space. Or, it's really easy to indicate for a foreshortened object with perspective going away in space. So both things that aren't all that common for a gesture. Usually gesture is just line, rhythm, it's a blueprint, so it's just getting you set up for your next stages. And it doesn't have to be all the different things. It doesn't have to be a finish, even though I know it's hard to separate that. So all I'm going to do is give you my thoughts on it. You don't have to use these or kind of abide by them. It's not the end all answer to everything that we're doing and in terms of drawing and gesture. It's just how I think about it. So you could take it or leave it. But if we start with this one, so I'm working from bodies in motion dot photo. That's probably my favorite resource to draw from. I just really like it. The other thing I get a lot with gesture, even though this is outside a bit of what it is that I'm talking about today, is, well, like, oh, I put a video up on gesture. It's like, well, that doesn't look like the pose. Well, shouldn't it be going this way? Sure. I mean, however you want to interpret a pose is fine. In gesture drawing, I'm not ever trying to copy it. I'm just not. It's not what I'm interested in. It could be for you, which is awesome, right? So it's definitely the most subjective stage in a drawing. And then for me, that might change, as maybe I start a little bit more exaggerated and looser, and then because I know in my mind how gesture leads to the next couple stages, I'm going to be able to correct or work with that. So it really is, it's personal. It's shorthand. It's shorthand for what you want to do in your drawing. So, I always, when I get feedback like that in YouTube videos or whatever, I just say, that's great. Like that interpretation totally makes sense to me. Unfortunately, it's not the way I went in this one drawing. But it's completely and always valid is the point there. So, if you're confused about anything I'm doing here, just kind of that standard gesture lay-in, I have a number of videos you could check out and kind of get a little bit more information. But if we are kind of keeping to the specifics here of foreshortening and how it might be working, what I'm doing with this one, just so we have some context, is I'm laying in all the basic heights and lengths, right? So when I do my gesture, I have a really specific way of thinking these lengths. Some of it does have to do with later teachings that I'll have on what proportion. And if you've taken a class with me or you're kind of looking at those, my proportion is really specific to gesture lines. So I'll do these kind of proportional breakups on our second week of anatomy or life drawing classes, right, where I kind of break down the heads and the really common stuff that people in drawing do. But all of my gesture lines are really specific to that. Like the cervical is about a third of a head. The thoracic is about, let's say, 1 2/3 of a head tall. The stretch line that I'll use in my gesture rhythms is about 3 heads. The lumbar about a third, the pelvis a head. And all of those connect for me to the actual proportion of the skeleton. The length of the femur would be about 1 2/3, 1.5 to 2 heads. It depends on what height you're using. Arms would be roughly the length of, to the humerus, the rib cage, right? If we did the kind of like a little arc back down, the headed medial epicondyle will hit the 10th rib. The length of the forearm at the wrist would hit the top of the hip. So those things are in my mind. I am thinking about those early on. And it can be useful to think about those when you start to go into foreshortening, right? So the reason we're using this one is the whole site is filled with beautiful poses, right? But if we start to think about how that changes, like how would I get from this, which is, the figure mostly upright, no foreshortening, to something that is, starting to now move here into something that's highly foreshortened. And for me, that always has to do with really specific thing. It's just tracking what these lengths would be initially. So having a good sense of what your lengths are, right, for just a standing or neutral figure. And then adjusting, right? So in this sense, foreshortening becomes the result of observing the relative change in length. And the way that you can do that, so just I'll give a description here before I do the drawing, is I'll usually just cut it, right? I'll decide if an arm is foreshortened, and I'm only using line, I'm not allowing myself shape or perspective, I'll just use half that length. And then I'll use wrapping lines, right, which would be the shorthand in a gesture that I'll use for showing a relative depth or angle of a cylinder to emphasize that distance or change. So to give you an example, something like this for me might look like head. Right, so here's my start, head. Do I see any neck? I don't think so. It doesn't look like it. So maybe I'll just do like a really light one in here. I'm just kind of thinking it, or even though I might not be seeing it or it's not there. Maybe the thoracic, right? So I'm going to try to track the line so you could see how I'd use each one. My natural progression would be 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I do that here, 1, really just thinking through, but I don't see much of the neck. Thoracic now is this long, right? And compare it. Compare this length to that length. Maybe it's like nearly half as short. Maybe a little longer than that. My stretch line could be here. That's definitely shorter. But I'm looking to get the same thing. I'm still looking to produce some kind of rhythmic interchange through the vehicle of asymmetry in between both, or each. Here's my lumbar. That's much shorter. I'm suggesting a bit of an overlap between the lines, but I'm not interested in doing the shape-based lay-in. No, there's no reason that you couldn't, right? You could do your gesture. Let's say you have a different kind of quality or idea for how you want to start your drawings, and you do, this. You could do some shapes and kind of block in your rib cages that way. That's fine. You could do that. That's not how I generally start. And the reason would be because a lot of the times we're using gesture to avoid that, something that's static or stiff. Maybe pelvis now I could do here. Right, then let's kind of get some wrapping lines to go in here. I'd say that's going away. So even though I'm not going to draw the whole perspective, my thinking for that would be that the pelvis is moving away in space at this angle. And the rib cage, if I were to put some wrapping lines here, kind of coming at me at that angle. And then, maybe this leg. So how can we kind of build into our leg here going this way? Well, that line was really long. Here I'm making it really short. I'm still trying to see if I can create that knotted quality of rhythm though, where every line is kind of pushing and coercing the eye down through the drawing and eventually into the foot. But if my, let's say, femur is this long, and then I make the transition to the knee, now I'll just go back to the normal length of the calf to foot, right? So maybe that line is more on par with what you would see in this length, right, for that leg there. This one, if we do our other leg now, maybe just slightly foreshortened on this. So I'm going to maybe do 2/3 of that length there. It depends on how foreshortened it is. Here's the perspective I would see it moving away at in terms of just giving you that ellipse. And we could chart that a little bit more too. So if we did the femur with that heavily foreshortened femur, what those wrapping lines would be showing is this perspective. So that's what this means to me in my brain as I'm laying this out. These lines here might communicate, that perspective going away. You don't have to draw all these little cylinder breakdowns across your drawing. I'm just trying to give you an expanded sense of what it means in my brain when I'm trying to create that. And now if you compare the length of this leg here, as we do the other lower leg, I'll make it shorter. We could use like a little S curve here. So that's somewhat foreshortened. So let's do our wraps. The thing I think you always want to remember with gesture would just be, it only is what it needs to be for you to move to the next stage. Exaggerate, don't exaggerate. Use line, use shape. It doesn't matter. It's just what you need to get to the next part of your drawing. So I'm trying to leave all of that stuff out just so I can focus on movement, rhythm, some type of feeling of weight and balance. All the things I'll talk about in gesture lectures, is everything else is stripped away to just focus on that. So if I do my arm here, I can still find a quality of gesture, like that might pull off the neck or the thoracic and give me this rhythmic lead into the arm. Both of these lines wouldn't be foreshortened. So that to me would just be kind of average going up, and then maybe slightly foreshortened here coming across, but nothing too extreme. On the other hand, this would be, this line would. So relative to the arm, which we talked about that length, I'm going to make it 2/3 of that, and then push these wraps so that it feels like it's going away. And then, maybe this comes back this way. Other things you could do, so that would be it. I mean, that is the long and the short of it, right? That's all that I would do in terms of a gesture that deals with foreshortening. Other things you could do if you wanted, though, would be like using line weight. If let's say I am keeping to just using the head as a shape and the rest of the body is going to be rhythm and line because that's what I like to build up and how I would approach my drawings, I could use a darker sense of line, like a heavier hand, in the closer parts, and then let it get more lightened and atmospheric as I move away. It'd be like applying atmospheric perspective to the idea of a gesture or a body. So hope that helps. Hope that gives you a sense of what I'm thinking about when it comes time to foreshortening gestures. Again, there's nothing wrong with using shapes or actually putting in cylinders if you like. But if you at all are like me and just like keeping it line-based and rhythm-based and trying to just set up the lengths for the development of the drawing in the next stage, this is a tool that I find works really well 99% of the time.